Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Green Flame, the Deep Green Resistance broadcast that brings you radical analysis, practical skills, and artistic expression from the revolutionary movement to defend the planet and rebuild just human communities. I am your host and comrade, Max Wilbert.
For this episode of The Green Flame, Women Picket DC, we interviewed Kara Dansky, attorney and feminist. We thank the suffragettes for their courage and commitment, and for the music your host, myself, Jennifer Mernan, performs with piano accompaniment. Kara Dansky, it's wonderful to have you here with us on The Green Flame. Thank you for joining us to talk about some really important developments. Kara Dansky is an attorney and feminist. She serves on the steering committee of the U.S. chapter of the Women's Human Rights Campaign and chairs the WHRC's Committee on Law and Legislation. She also has an extensive background in criminal justice reform and advocacy. Welcome, Kara.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Kara, could you tell us about what organizations you're engaged in?
Absolutely. So I'm involved in the U.S. chapter of the Women's Human Rights Campaign, which is a feminist organization that promotes the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights, which anyone around the world can sign. It's a global organization, and we have our U.S.-based chapter. And I'm also involved globally at the level of chairing, as you said, on the Law and Legislation Committee. And we're very excited. I know we're going to be talking about an upcoming event in Washington, D.C. on March 8th, but I can also share that the Women's Human Rights Campaign will be presenting at a parallel event at the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women on March 20th. It's a virtual event, and so we're very excited to be doing that.
That's great. That explains what you're doing currently with all of that work. And yes, I'd like to talk about the Women Picket DC event. And let's talk about this other event as well.
So the inspiration for Women Picket DC came on the day after President Biden signed an executive order to protect, quote unquote, sexual orientation and gender identity in administrative law. And it might be good to talk a little bit about that executive order. But the gist of it is that that executive order is terrible for the rights, privacy, and safety of women and girls. And the day after he signed that order, I found myself feeling really depressed about it for all that it means for women and girls and for the environment and for the earth itself. And I was in a pretty terrible state. And I was having a conversation with a friend, and all of a sudden this image popped into my mind of women picketing the White House over 100 years ago, fighting for our right to have a say in government, i.e. vote. And one of the signs that the suffragists held when they picketed the White House was a sign that said, "Dear Mr. President, how long must women wait for liberty?" And I thought, we need to do that. We need to do that. We had just gotten rid of the former president. And the minute the new president took office, he chose to sign an order that is set to obliterate the rights, privacy, and safety of women and girls. And so we have the same question that we had over 100 years ago. Mr. President, how long must women wait for liberty? And so this friend that I was talking with, I shared this with her, and she became very excited and inspired, and it took on a life of its own. And we're very organized. We've got a lot of people coming to Washington, D.C. to demand liberty for women and girls on March 8th.
That's great. And I think that for our listeners, it would be wonderful for you to explain a little bit why this is such a hit on the rights of women and girls. What is this executive order? Tell us more.
So this executive order was signed by the president, and it affects administrative law only, by which I mean it does not affect any statutory law on its face. It only affects administrative law. So it's somewhat limited in that sense. But what the executive order does is essentially two things. The first thing it does is it sets forth a policy to define sex for administrative purposes to include so-called gender identity. And the second thing it does is order US administrative agencies to spend the next several months looking at all of its policies and regulations. I apologize for that noise. Looking at all of its policies and regulations wherever it defines sex to redefine that to include gender identity. And after 100 days from the signing of the order, administrative agencies are required to produce a plan for redefining sex to mean gender identity. And so the order is terrible news for women and girls. It's absolutely terrible. But we need to understand that as bad as it is, it gives us time to explain to US administrative agencies just how bad it is and why administrative agencies should not redefine sex in administrative law to include gender identity. And so women around the US are really pumped. We're pumped, we're angry, we're organized, and we're ready to take on this administration.
So who can engage in taking this time to go ahead and explain what's going on to legislators? How can you do this?
So one thing to do is, first of all, sign the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights. You can find it at womensdeclaration.com. And once you sign that, U.S. women can volunteer to work with the U.S. chapter of the Women's Human Rights Campaign. We're putting together teams to address the executive order, and we're ready to go. So if women women and men can sign the declaration, womensdeclaration.com. And once you've signed it, women, specifically women, can volunteer to work with us at the U.S. chapter of the Women's Human Rights Campaign. That's probably the most effective way to go about pushing back on this order.
Okay, and who can engage with the Women Picket DC event? Going back to one of the questions here, how can you do that, and who can do that?
Anyone can do that. There's a website. It's womenpicketdc.org. There's a Facebook page. It's a public page. So for those of us who are on Facebook, you can go into Facebook and search for Women Picket DC, and there's a ton of information there about logistics. And if there's anyone out there who wants to support us but is unable to travel to DC, there's a Give Butter campaign page where people can donate. We would be so grateful for support. All financial contributions go to funding the costs of picketing the White House. Everyone who's involved in this effort is a volunteer. So no one's getting paid, but there are a lot of costs associated with travel and lodging and printing and video and those kinds of things.
Is there also an effort to do things on a state level at state capitals? Does that make sense in this campaign?
Yeah, that would be great. If anybody wants to picket their state houses, that would be fantastic. You know, this is part of a much larger effort. We should say Women Picket DC is very specifically directed at President Biden and at the executive order that he signed. But this is also part of a much larger movement. And we have to be very realistic about what the Democratic Party is doing to women and girls with respect to its embrace of so-called gender identity. So if anyone wants to picket their state houses, that's a very good thing to be doing, especially in states where there are bills pending there are approximately 19 states, for example, that are considering bills to protect women's sports. That's a really good thing to be picketing on.
And I was thinking about that long arc of history with women's struggle for the vote and that image and how that could be replicated. Is there any effort to kind of present that historic aspect and how this is part of that long continuum at the Picket DC event, or would that make sense at a state capitol building as well? I'm just curious about that.
You know, if women want to hold signs that say Mr. President or, Mr. Lawmaker, Mr. Legislator, how long must women wait for liberty? I think it's really important to get the message out there that it's been hundreds of years. Literally, I mean that question literally, and the suffragists meant that question literally. How long must women wait for liberty? Really? Like, what's the answer to that question? It's not rhetorical. And the lawmakers in the state houses are, in fact, no different from, the president in the White House, in the sense of embracing so-called gender identity. And I think that imagery is extremely important. And, we need to be realistic as well that the women who stood up outside the White House over 100 years ago faced immense abuse. Men did not like that women were demanding the right to participate in civic life. They didn't like it at all. Those women were spit on, they were attacked, they were abused, and eventually they were arrested and force-fed in prison. And we need to be really realistic about what we're up against here. Men don't like it when women challenge their power. And that is absolutely something that women can do in states who are not able, for whatever reason, or not interested in coming to DC.
Thank you. There's another action that you mentioned on the 20th, or another event on the 20th that's important to engage in or support. What is that?
This is a global movement, right? The Women's Human Rights Campaign is a global organization. And so we're going to the UN. Every year, the Commission on the Status of Women has held an event. It's been in person in New York at the UN for decades. This is the 65th anniversary of this annual event at the Commission on the Status of Women, where NGOs network and talk to each other and present their work on what they're doing all over the world to support and protect the rights, privacy, and safety of women and girls. This year, for the first time, it's virtual. And one of the things that means is that there's been a tremendous uptick in interest because women all over the world can participate globally. And the Women's Human Rights Campaign will be presenting information on the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights. Now, we have to be very mindful of the fact that the Commission on the Status of Women and an organization called UN Women have become very loud in their support for so-called gender identity, which is a denial of the reality that women are female. And so what we're doing is actually pretty radical by presenting the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights, and we're really excited about it.
How can we attend that? And how can we talk in all of the different forums that'll be happening with this UN gathering about the WHRC and women's sex-based rights?
So go to the website ngocsw.org, and that will take you to the general organization, which is really worth exploring. It's pretty fascinating, really, to read about the struggles of women all over the world. We here at the moment are really talking about so-called gender identity because, well, for reasons that many of your listeners will know, but specifically at the moment because of the recent order from the White House. But to really read about and listen to women all over the world talk about, for example, rape in various countries in Africa, rape during times of invading armies. Women are still really struggling with a lot of challenging issues. And so it's just very exciting to have this movement of global solidarity amongst women. So if you go to the website, NGOCSW65, that gets you to the forum, and there's a link that you can click. It's called Register to Become an Advocate. And that gets you on the way to registering to participate in the event in March.
Thank you. Are there any last thoughts that you have for our listeners about ways to engage or about the WHRC? I know that Saturday mornings there are amazing panels that happen with the WHRC.
Yeah, at this point, as far as I know, there are over 14,000 signatures on the declaration from, I think it's maybe 127 or 128 countries. It's really exciting. So please go ahead and sign the declaration. You'll receive invitations to participate in the Saturday morning webinars that you're referring to. And I will just say on a personal level, participating in these Saturday morning webinars has been incredibly inspiring and very life affirming to hear from women all over the world who are engaging in this fight. I know that next Saturday, Leah Keith, for example, will be presenting, and there will be a conversation about women who are doing environmental work. They're really wonderful, fantastic webinars. They typically get at least 300 participants. There's a chat function where you can talk with and network with women all over the world. So please do that. And since President Biden signed this order, the declaration has gotten 350 or so brand new signatures from the United States. Women are really engaged, and it's very exciting. And the US chapter has gotten something like 50 new volunteers. There are a ton of ways to get engaged, and everyone has something to offer. I frequently get told when I talk about activism, some woman will eventually say, well, I don't have any skills. I don't have anything to offer. That is not true. Everyone has a skill to offer. The Women's Human Rights Campaign US chapter recently had a volunteer reach out and say, you know what? I know how to edit Wikipedia pages. Is that something I should do? Should I go edit Wikipedia pages to bring in more radical feminist content? And we were like, absolutely. That's a fantastic idea. Please do that. And so she said, okay, I know a handful of women who can edit Wikipedia pages. I'll form a working group. Is that a good idea? And we were like, absolutely. That's a fantastic idea. So, some of us are good at reading legislation and interpreting legislation and executive orders and Supreme Court opinions and things like that. I happen to be good at those things, but I don't know anything about how to edit a Wikipedia page. So it's great that a woman stood up and said, this is a skill that I have. I want to bring that to this fight. Should I do that? Absolutely. Whatever skills you have. A lot of women are really great at political art. One of the WHRC Saturday webinars featured a woman named Angela Wild in the UK who does astonishing political art. It's beautiful and it's moving and it's fantastic. I don't do political art for the simple reason that I would be absolutely terrible at it. But if you do political art, please do it. Please do it for the women's movement. Please do it for Women Picket DC. Please do it for the Women's Human Rights Campaign. There's room for everyone in this movement.
And I just want to say, too, that those Saturday morning webinars are the kind of thing that you were talking about. Oh, my gosh, we get this opportunity to speak to women all over the world, that you're there with women from everywhere with very different struggles and different parts of the world than the one that you have. And uniting together in those webinars has been amazing for me. I enjoy them so much. And I also want to clarify for our listeners too, that these are places where women get together. I don't believe that they're open for men's participation at all. Is that true?
I don't know how strictly the organizers police that. So I suspect that there are men who are listening to the webinars. I believe that I have seen some men contribute to the chat discussion. So I think that, I don't know is the answer to the question. But the other answer to the question is that they routinely get 300 to 400 participants, and they're organized by a small handful of women who just don't have the capacity or the resources to monitor all of that. So I honestly just don't fully know the answer to the question. I apologize.
Oh, no problem at all. I was just curious about that because it seemed as if it was women's space, but I don't get into seeing all 300 participants or what was there. And it's always extremely respectful and always extremely well attended and just so beneficial in so many ways. So yeah, thank you for that. And thank you
Yeah,
for clarifying that. That makes it even more impressive to me that you've got a space where there are some men showing up and they're being such incredible allies.
right, absolutely. And to the best of my knowledge, none of the webinars have had men as speakers. So even if men do participate as an attendee, this is a platform for women to speak.
Thank you for that. Is there anything else that you'd like to add, Kara, before we conclude the interview?
Well, I've been thinking a lot about a number of things, but one of the things I've really been thinking about is that the struggle for women's liberation it's so deeply connected to everything that we're doing. And part of why these webinars are so great and part of why they're so well attended is that it's virtual. And of course, the reason that it's virtual is because we're experiencing this pandemic, which is in so many ways, it's a disaster for humanity, but it's also brought us opportunities to connect in ways that the struggle for women's liberation has not been able to do in a very long time. So there are a lot of moving parts here. There are a lot of things to talk about, but this global movement is something that's really exciting. And I really hope that your listeners will connect in some way, whether it's Women Picket DC or whether it's the Women's Human Rights Campaign. There are so many ways to get involved, and I'm grateful to everyone who wants to get involved and participate.
Thank you, Kara. It's been a delight to have you here for the Green Flame, and I wish you well and the campaign well, and we all want to engage and support the struggle for women's human rights.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thanks to DGR for all its great work.
As always, we thank you, our listeners, for joining us on this episode of The Green Flame. You can find everything you need to know about the Women's Human Rights Campaign by going to womensdeclaration.com. Country contacts can be made, news, resources, as well as the ability to donate to the WHRC, and much, much more can be found on their website. Women, if you would like to view previous Saturday morning WHRC Feminist Question Time presentations, the YouTube link can be found on this webpage, womensdeclaration.com. Men are encouraged to watch these presentations on YouTube as well. Oh Dear, What Can the Matter Be? Words by L. May Wheeler. Oh dear, what can the matter be? Dear, dear, what can the matter be? Oh dear, what can the matter be? Women are wanting the vote. Women can dress, they love society. Women have cash with its variety. Women can pray with sweetest piety. Why are they wanting to vote? Women are preaching to sinners today. Women are healing the sick by the way. Women are dealing out laws as they may. Why are they wanting to vote? Women are traveling about here and there. Women are working like men everywhere. Women are crowding, then claiming it's fair. Why are they wanting to vote? Women have reared all the sons of the brave. Women have shared in the burdens they gave. Women have labored your country to save. That's why we're wanting to vote. And it's, oh dear, what can the matter be? Dear, dear, what can the matter be? Oh dear, what can the matter be when men want every vote? Now, let's do one, and then a reiteration. Oh dear, what can the matter be? Dear, dear, what can the matter be? Oh dear, what can the matter be? Women are wanting their rights. And it's, oh dear, what can the matter be? Dear, dear, what can the matter be? Oh dear, what can the matter be when men want every right?
This is Max Wilbert, one of the hosts of the Green Flame podcast. I want to thank you for listening to our show and let you know a few ways that you can support the Green Flame. First, you can subscribe to our platform using the podcasting system of your choice. We're listed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pocket Cast, and all the rest. We're even on YouTube. Leaving us a positive review or rating on these platforms helps us reach a larger audience. You can also share these shows with your friends. If you're interested in donating to support the production of the Green Flame, please visit deepgreenresistance.org. And finally, the goal of this show is to activate people. So if you really want to support this show, start organizing in your own community. Thank you again for listening.